For years, people around the world had heard the voice of Pastor Gino Jennings shaking the walls of churches, echoing with power and confidence. His words were strong, his beliefs even stronger. He stood tall, preaching about holiness, truth, and strict discipline. Many admired him. Many feared him. He was known as the man who never bowed to the world, never softened his message, and never cared about being liked. But you won't believe what was happening behind those church doors when the lights went off and the crowds went home. Let me tell you, the real story was far from what people thought. Everyone saw Gino Jennings as a man of faith, a warrior for God. But behind that pulpit, there was another story growing quietly, a story that would soon shake the very foundation of his legacy. One of his sons, the same child who once sat proudly in the front row, had finally decided to speak. His voice didn't sound angry, but it carried something deeper: pain, truth, and a need to be heard. And this is how the silence began to break. He shared what it really felt like to grow up under the shadow of one of the most talked about preachers in America. From the outside, the Jennings home looked perfect, full of faith, order, and discipline. But here is the shocking part. That same discipline that built a church empire also built invisible walls inside their house. Every move his children made was watched. Every word weighed. They were told that they were not just his kids, but a reflection of his ministry. They carried the name Jennings like a badge and a burden. They couldn't play like other kids, couldn't question, couldn't relax. Even laughter sometimes felt like a risk. The son said it felt like living in a constant spotlight, one he never asked for. He remembered sitting in church, hearing his father's voice boom through the microphone: "Obey, sacrifice, be holy." Those words weren't just for the crowd. They were for him too. Every mistake felt like a sin, every doubt like a crime. He said it was like being molded into something he didn't choose to be. The craziest part was that he loved his father deeply. He admired his strength, his courage, his confidence. But at the same time, he was scared of disappointing him. It was a strange mix of love and fear that never left his heart. As he grew older, that pressure only grew heavier. He started to wonder who he really was. Was he just the preacher's son, or was he his own person? But this is where it gets interesting. He couldn't ask that question out loud. In the Jennings house, questioning authority was the same as questioning God. And no one dared to do that, so he stayed quiet, hiding his confusion behind a polite smile. But silence has a way of growing louder inside you, and his was becoming unbearable. What makes this story different is that it wasn't just about strict rules or tough love. It was about identity, about a son trying to find himself in the shadow of a giant. Every Sunday, he sat there listening to sermons that told people to live righteously, but at home, he was fighting to breathe under the weight of perfection. He once said, "I didn't even know what I wanted in life. Everything I wanted was already decided for me." That line alone showed how deep the control ran. Destiny took an unexpected turn when the quiet inside him finally turned into a storm. Years of holding in words, questions, and emotions started to break him down. He wanted to believe that faith meant peace, but at home, it meant pressure. He wanted to believe that love meant freedom, but at home, it meant obedience. His father preached about truth every day, but he felt like he was living a lie, pretending to be perfect while feeling completely lost inside. There were moments when he thought of walking away, but fear always pulled him back. He feared what people would say. He feared being called unfaithful, a disappointment, or worse, a sinner. He feared that stepping away from his father's image meant stepping away from God. So he stayed silent for years, carrying the weight of being both son and symbol. But deep inside, something was changing. He was no longer that boy who followed orders blindly. He was becoming a man who wanted answers, even if they cost him everything. And then, One night, something inside him broke. After another long sermon about obedience, he sat alone, staring at the same pulpit that had shaped his life. He thought, how can we preach truth if we're hiding pain? That question stayed with him. It burned quietly, eating away at the fear that once controlled him. And soon, that fear turned into courage, the kind of courage that comes when silence can no longer protect you. He knew once he spoke, there was no going back. The moment he decided to tell his story, everything began to change. For years, he had been the quiet one, the obedient son who never stepped out of line. But now he was about to do what no one in the Jennings family had ever done: speak openly about what it was really like to grow up under Pastor Gino Jennings. You won't believe the storm that followed. Let me tell you, the internet didn't just react, it exploded. At first, it started with a simple post, a few heartfelt words about truth and healing. He didn't name anyone, didn't throw blame, but people knew exactly who he was talking about. Within hours, comments flooded in. Some called him brave, others called him a traitor. Supporters of his father said he was attacking God's chosen messenger. Critics said he was finally exposing what had been hidden for too long. And this is how the controversy began. One confession that would divide the Christian world. But here is the shocking part. His words weren't filled with hate. He didn't curse his father or his church. He simply told his truth. He said he loved his father, but love doesn't erase pain. He said holiness without understanding becomes fear. That line alone shook people. Podcasts started discussing it. Social media turned it into headlines, and soon millions of people were talking about the Jennings family. Some people felt sympathy, others felt betrayed, but everyone wanted to know what really happened behind those closed doors. As the days went by, the story spread like wildfire. Old clips of Gino Jennings' fiery sermons started resurfacing. People began to see them differently. Words that once sounded powerful now felt heavy. Obedience, submission, authority. They all carried a new meaning, and this is where it gets interesting, because the more people listened, the more they wondered if the same rules that built his ministry also broke his home. The son spoke again, this time in a long interview. He described growing up in an environment where faith wasn't a choice. It was a rule. We didn't just go to church, he said. We lived church. Every day started with scripture and ended with correction. There was no space for weakness, no time for mistakes. Even emotions were questioned. If you cried, you were told to pray. If you doubted, you were told to repent. He said it felt like living inside a sermon that never ended. The craziest part was that even in his pain, he never wanted to destroy his father's image. He said, I wasn't trying to hurt him. I just wanted to live without pretending anymore. That one sentence spread across every platform, sparking deep debates about family, faith, and control. Some called it rebellion, others called it redemption. But what makes this story different is that it wasn't about revenge. It was about truth finally being spoken after years of silence. As the pressure built online, Gino Jennings himself couldn't stay silent for long. Destiny took an unexpected turn when he stepped onto his pulpit one Sunday, his eyes sharp, his tone colder than usual. Without naming anyone, he said, "When you're chosen by God, the devil will use anyone, even family, to silence the truth." The crowd roared in agreement, applause filled the room, shouts of amen echoed through the church. But behind that moment of praise, something much deeper was happening. For his son, that sermon wasn't just another message, it was personal. It was a reminder that speaking the truth had now made him the enemy. He watched the clip circulate online, his father standing tall, defending his mission, and he realized this was no longer just a family issue. It was now a public war between faith and feeling, loyalty and honesty, love and pain. And this is where things began to spiral. The more Gino preached about loyalty, the more people speculated. The more he warned about rebellion, the more his followers whispered. Some believed his son had been deceived. Others thought maybe, just maybe, there was truth behind those words of pain. Suddenly, two images of Gino Jennings began to appear. One of a powerful man of God, and the other of a father whose authority may have gone too far. Week after week, Gino's sermons grew more intense. He spoke of betrayal, of endurance, of staying strong in the face of trials. He told his congregation that not everyone who shares your blood shares your vision. The message was clear. To his supporters, it was a spiritual battle. To his critics, it was deflection. But to his son, it was heartbreak. Because he wasn't fighting a preacher, he was missing a father. Days turned into weeks, but the fire of the controversy refused to die. Every new video, every small sermon clip, every podcast mention added more fuel to the story. The world was watching, and neither father nor son could hide from it anymore. But you won't believe what happened next, because what started as anger slowly began turning into something else. Let me tell you, destiny had another plan for both of them. After that stormy period, the son disappeared from the public eye for a while. He stopped posting, stopped talking, stopped defending himself. Many thought he gave up, but in that silence, something unexpected was happening. He was healing. Away from the noise, away from the spotlight, he started to look at everything differently. He began to see that telling the truth wasn't about destroying someone, it was about freeing yourself. He said later, "I didn't want revenge, I wanted peace." And this is how his journey toward forgiveness began. But here's the shocking part. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. He still carried the memories, the discipline, the pressure, and the pain. Yet, something inside him shifted. He realized that holding on to that pain would only turn him into what he feared most, someone who preached truth but never lived it. So instead of fighting back, he chose to let go. He started focusing on building his own life, not his father's image. He got quiet, but not weak. He became peaceful, but stronger than ever before. This is where it gets interesting. Months later, he agreed to sit for an interview, one that would become one of the most talked about moments in Christian media. Everyone expected anger, bitterness, or accusation. But when the cameras started rolling, what came out of his mouth surprised the entire world. His voice was calm, his face peaceful. He said, "I forgave my father a long time ago, because holding on to pain only makes you become what hurt you." Those words changed everything. The internet, once full of chaos and criticism, went silent for a moment. It wasn't just a confession, it was healing being spoken out loud. The craziest part was that even his father's followers, the same ones who once called the son rebellious, started to soften. People began saying things like, "That's real strength," and "This is what true faith looks like." What makes this story different is that the same truth that once divided people was now bringing them together. The son's calmness did something that arguments and sermons couldn't. It reminded everyone that behind every preacher, there's a family trying to heal too. And destiny took an unexpected turn again. Because while the son was healing, people close to the Jennings family began whispering that maybe, just maybe, Gino himself had changed too. His tone in sermons was softer. His words about family became warmer. He started talking about grace, patience, and love in ways he never did before. He didn't mention his son, but it was clear that something inside him was different. Those who attended his services said they noticed pauses, moments where he seemed to think before speaking, moments where his once unshakable confidence carried a small trace of reflection. Some said it looked like he was preaching not to the crowd, but to himself. Maybe he realized that even men of God aren't immune to pain. Maybe he finally understood that leadership doesn't mean perfection, it means humanity. Meanwhile, the son revealed that he and his father had spoken privately. He didn't share details, but he said it was real. No cameras, no sermons, no audience, just two men talking. For the first time, he said, we spoke as men, not as preacher and son. That simple line touched millions. It showed that behind all the noise, behind all the headlines, there was still love trying to find its way back. But here's where the story took another twist. The media, always hungry for drama, tried to reignite the fire. Articles came out asking if the Jennings ministry would ever be the same again. Some said the controversy had weakened Gino's authority. Others believed it made him more human. But one thing was certain. People were no longer just talking about the scandal. They were talking about healing, about forgiveness, about what happens when faith and family collide. The son's decision to forgive became bigger than both of them. It started a ripple effect. Across churches, families, and communities, people began opening up about their own pain. Children of strict parents shared stories online. Former church members wrote posts about their struggles with silence and guilt. What had once been a private family wound turned into a public movement toward honesty. And for the first time, people began to understand that faith without love loses its meaning. Time passed, and slowly the noise began to fade. The online debates grew quieter, and the world seemed to move on. But deep down, something lasting had changed, not just in the Jennings family, but in everyone who had followed their story. You won't believe how this final chapter unfolded, because what began as a controversy ended up revealing something no sermon ever could. Let me tell you, destiny had saved the most unexpected turn for last. Behind closed doors, Gino Jennings remained mostly silent about the entire matter. No interviews, no statements, no online posts. But those who watched him closely said they could see it. A difference in his eyes, a softness in his voice. His sermons still carried strength, but now there was a new kind of wisdom in them. He spoke more often about mercy, about understanding, about the importance of leading with love. For a man once known for thunderous preaching, those quiet moments said more than any fiery message ever could. But here is the shocking part. He never directly mentioned his son, not once. And yet, everyone knew. When he spoke about forgiveness, people listened differently. When he talked about grace, hearts softened. It was as if he was preaching to himself, learning and healing at the same time. Some of his followers believed God was using the entire situation to remind even their strongest leader that holiness is not about perfection, it's about compassion. Meanwhile, his son continued his own quiet journey. He wasn't trying to build fame or start another wave of attention. He began helping others who felt trapped between faith and family. He spoke in small groups, not as a victim, but as someone who had finally found peace. He said, I realize truth isn't supposed to destroy, it's supposed to free. Those words reach far beyond his own story. They touch people who had been silent for years, people who were afraid to speak their truth because of fear, judgment, or religion. This is where it gets interesting. What once looked like a broken family started to become a symbol of hope. The very story that had divided people began to bring them together. Churches across the country started talking about how faith leaders could balance authority with love. Families that had been torn apart by strict traditions began to sit down and talk. Pastors who once preached about punishment started preaching about patience. The Jennings story had quietly changed something bigger than itself. The craziest part was that even though the world saw them as opposites, father versus son, deep down, they were still connected by the same thing, truth. Both of them believed in standing firm, in speaking what they thought was right. The only difference was how they expressed it. And maybe that was the lesson all along, that truth doesn't always come from the pulpit. Sometimes it comes from the pain that forces you to grow. Destiny took an unexpected turn one more time. when rumors began to spread that father and son had met again. Not in a public setting, not in church, but privately, somewhere quiet, away from the cameras. Some said there were no speeches, no arguments, just silence, tears, and maybe a few words of forgiveness. No one really knew the full story, but those close to the family said one thing: there was peace. And after everything they had been through, peace was the greatest miracle of all. What makes the story different is that it didn't end in destruction. It ended in understanding. Both men, once divided by pride and pain, learned something powerful. Truth may hurt, but it also heals. Faith may demand strength, but it also requires grace. And love, no matter how buried it becomes, always finds a way to return. In the end, the Jennings family story became bigger than controversy, bigger than the pulpit, bigger than the debate. It became a reminder that even those who preach need forgiveness, and even those who follow can teach. It showed the world that no matter how deep the divide, there's always a path back, if you choose to walk it. And maybe that's what true holiness really is. Not in the loud sermons or the strict rules, but in the quiet moments when you choose love over pride, forgiveness over anger, and peace over pain. Because truth, once spoken, doesn't just expose, it sets you free. And that was how the story of Pastor Gino Jennings and his son finally came full circle, not with noise, but with grace.